This nugget, the second in a series of 5, focused on summarizing the processes to be followed, the activities to be followed in each of the 5 project management process areas, is focused on planning, project planning. Project planning, as we discussed in earlier nuggets, is the most critical of all components to the project management processes. Project management is where you guide the successful execution of the project. Without proper project planning, it is highly unlikely your project will ever conclude, let alone ever successfully conclude on time and on budget. It's very important that you ensure you spend the sufficient time in project planning, that you develop the appropriate plans for the project to ensure overall project success. Project planning includes each of the knowledge areas. So in project planning, we will talk about scope planning, ensuring we define what is in scope, what the project is going to complete. We will talk about creating the work breakdown structure, identifying all of the deliverables and all of the tasks required to complete the deliverables necessary to achieve the scope. We will take the work breakdown structure, assign resources, assign estimates, put it into our scheduling tool, and develop the project schedule. Once we have that in place, we will develop the budget. We will include costs for all of the resources, all of the goods, all of the services, all of the materials that must be purchased for the project, and develop an overall project budget. We will ensure we have a firm understanding of the quality expectations for the business, and will define the proper processes, and will ensure the proper processes are built into our project plan to manage and control and ensure the level of quality for the project. We'll develop effective plans for the HR component to our project. We'll ensure we have plans in place identifying when resources will come and leave the project based on the work breakdown structure in the schedule. We'll also develop HR plans to identify processes for training. We'll identify processes for team communications. We'll identify processes for conflict resolution, communications management. We'll ensure that we have the proper processes in place to ensure the team works effectively. We'll identify all of the risks or the relevant risks for the project, and we'll ensure that we have proactive risk management plans in place to ensure that we are effectively addressing the risks and we have the proper contingency and proper reserves in place for our project to ensure its success. And where appropriate, we will plan the procurement components. We will make sure we have the proper plans in place to identify what the project will be purchasing and to identify that we're following the proper practices for purchasing for the project. There's a lot involved with project planning. As I said a moment ago, it encompasses each one of the knowledge areas, and it's important that you pay particular attention to each one of these knowledge areas, because without a proper project plan in place, you don't know what it is you're delivering, and if you don't know what you're delivering, you'll never be able to successfully deliver it. The other important aspect to project planning that we mentioned early in this Nugget series is project planning is not a one-time activity at the beginning of the project, it's ongoing. Yes, there is a very intensive upfront planning process. Very intensive upfront planning process where you will develop the original scope plan, WBS, schedule, budget, quality, HR, risks, and procurement aspects to the project. Very intensive, very critical to overall project delivery, but there's ongoing aspects to project planning as well. With each new change introduced to your project, every time the business asks to add functionality, every time the business asks to remove functionality, it's critical that you go through a complete planning process for that change element. Understand what impact that change is going to have on scope, on the WBS, on the schedule, on the budget, on the quality expectations for the project, on the HR plan. Do you need to change the HR complement? Do you need to add resources? Do you need to move resources? Does it change the identified risks for the project? Does it remove risks or does it add risks? And do you need to add more procurement to the project to deal with the ongoing changes that will be involved with routine, day-to-day, week-in, week-out delivery of your project? So again, project planning is critical. You need to have effective project plans in place to manage the project, and you need to have effective project planning in place ongoing to deal with each and every change that comes up as part of routine project delivery. For the remainder of this nugget, we will focus on summarizing the key aspects that we discussed in the earlier nuggets on each of the core aspects related to scope management. In this segment, we'll focus on the actual scope plan. It's defining what is in the scope, what is the project responsible for, what must the project complete to be successful, and as important, and sometimes more importantly, it's defining what is not in scope. It's defining a box with a crooked side, and everything inside that box is in scope. Everything outside the box is not in scope. So your project is responsible for ensuring that it completes, delivers, satisfies all of the definition of all of the scope contained inside the box, but is not responsible for addressing any of the other business functions that may interface to, but not contained in the scope statement itself. In order for the scope statement to be useful, it needs to be definitive, it needs to be unambiguous, it needs to be clear, it needs to be constructed in such a way that it leaves no room for interpretation. No matter who reads the project scope statement, the business sponsor, a senior executive, an IT person, an external consultant, a contractor, a stakeholder, it needs to be definitive, it needs to clearly define what is in scope, it needs to be unambiguous, written in clear language. I find using point form, bullets, far more unambiguous than long, flowing textual paragraphs. It needs to be clear. It needs to clearly define what is in scope and what is not in scope. A concern we have is in order to make our project flexible, in order to ensure that our project can be adaptable to changing business requirements, where appropriate, your scope statement also needs to be flexible. So you don't need to nail down unnecessary details that truly do not impact the definition of what is in scope and what is not in scope. A very simplistic example, you're building a home. You're hiring a contractor, a project manager to build your home. Your expectation is each of the interior rooms of your home will be painted. To be more specific, you're probably expecting that each of the interior rooms in your home will be painted with a coat of undercoat, primer paint, as well as 2 coats of finish paint, so a total of 3 coats of paint. That is a good definition of scope. Each interior room, walls and ceilings, will be painted with a coat of primer and 2 coats of finish paint. You do not need to define early in the scope planning process the exact colors. You do not need to define the shade of blue, the shade of green, or even whether it is blue or green that is going into the master bedroom versus the second bedroom versus the third bedroom. So it's definitive, 3 coats of paint, it's unambiguous, it's paint, it's clear. Everybody understands what paint is. There is no doubt as to what the definition for the scope for the home is going to be, but it's flexible where appropriate. It doesn't truly impact the planning process, doesn't truly impact the work or the cost to the project to give the homeowner, yourself, the flexibility to determine the colors of each room much later in the project. Maybe you would put a statement in, the color codes, the colors for the rooms must be determined 2 weeks prior to the painters coming on site, for example. That gives us flexibility where appropriate. The next step in the planning process is to create the project work breakdown structure, the WBS. To create the work breakdown structure, you need to identify all of the deliverables. We're going to produce a requirements document. We're going to produce a design document. We need to define clearly what each of the documents are going to be, and then we need to identify the work packages, the tasks that are going to be assigned to our team members to produce the requirements definition document. So you need to interview. You need to review. You need to. The same would go for the design document. Identifies all of the steps that are required to understand, to provide the information that was going to allow the team to produce each of the deliverables that are required. The sum of each of these deliverables, or the sum of all of the deliverables combined, is going to result in the project scope. So this is very much a building process. First we define the project scope, then we identify and create the WBS, identifying all of the deliverables that are required to produce the project scope, to allow our project to satisfy and complete the expectations of the business for the project, and then identifying all of the work packages, the work elements that are going to be completed by our team members that are necessary to produce the deliverables. The next step is to define the actual project schedule. To create and define the project schedule, we combine the WBS that we just developed, add in detailed estimates for the work. Remember, estimates are for work required to complete each element of the WBS, and then assign the resources to the WBS based on the estimates. We put all of this together into our scheduling tool. We ask our scheduling tool to do its magic, and we get a project schedule. As we discussed during the detailed nugget on schedule development, you can expect this process, creating, combining, estimating, assigning resources, running the scheduling tool, to be an iterative process. It will take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, possibly iterations, to come up with the appropriate project schedule. What do we define as the appropriate project schedule? I would define the appropriate project schedule is it's realistic. We believe, based on all the information we have at hand, that the WBS is complete, that it is not over complete. We have not padded it with extra effort, but it is the actual WBS that is required to satisfy our project scope. It is well balanced. A well-balanced project is where the resources are fully utilized. Once a team member joins your project, they are on the project for the appropriate duration, running at full utilization. And finally, I believe a project schedule needs to be mildly aggressive. We don't want to pad the estimates with so much fluff that the project schedule, instead of being a 6-month project, becomes a 12-month project. And as soon as you submit the 12-month project to senior management for approval, they're going to say, no, this project isn't approved, it's going to take too long, it's going to cost too much money. Therefore, it's your responsibility as a project manager, when you're developing the project schedule, is to ensure that it is mildly aggressive, that it is realistic, that you have the right work and the right estimates, but it is mildly aggressive. You're challenging your team to do their best to ensure that the project will deliver and that the project itself will be approved. The next step in the planning process is to develop the project budget. Identify, capture, and consolidate all of the dollars for all of the resources that are involved in, assigned to, the WBS. Consolidate, find, include all of the dollars for all of the materials that must be purchased to satisfy your project requirements that are going to be consumed by your project. The dollars for any services that your project is going to purchase. The dollars for any contracts that your project is going to purchase. You will combine all of this together in some format that is suitable to the financial management principles of your organization. Is it a cash flow? Is it the net present value? Is it the future value? How does the financial management of your organization expect a project budget to be produced? You need to ensure you're developing, understanding, capturing all of the dollars associated with all components to your project, and then package it in such a way that it's going to satisfy the financial management aspects for your project. And the key is you need to ensure you're addressing all of the financial budgets, that you're looking at the total life cycle. Not just the dollars directly associated with the project, but the dollars associated with purchasing any ongoing products and services, the ongoing support, any other issues involved with your organization with maintaining the life of your project, the life of the results of your project once it is completed and put into production in your business itself. So developing the budget truly presents the big picture, what the overall project is going to cost, especially if you can include the complete life cycle cost for your project, to ensure that the financial management, that the cash flow analysis for your organization is complete, predictable, and reliable. Another key aspect to project planning is to identify, to understand, to define, and to plan the quality processes into your project to ensure that your final product satisfies the quality expectations for the business. So the first step to that is to define the quality expectations. What does the business define as a high quality product? As we discussed in the detailed nuggets, does a high quality product mean absolutely 100% fault free? Does the high quality or the quality expectations for the project mean there can be no critical faults, but there can be no more than 2 minor faults and no more than 10 cosmetic faults? You need to understand what the business's expectations for quality is, what their definition of quality is, and then ensure that the property quality steps, that the reviews, the inspections, the walkthrough, the standards and procedures, the appropriate steps are built in to ensure that the project delivers quality the first time as opposed to eventually retrofits quality into the project. We want to do it right the first time. Quality does not cost. Building quality into your project does not add cost to your project. Not building quality into your project increases your project cost. Building quality in, doing it right the first time, truly decreases the overall total cost to your project, the total time to deliver for your project to the organization. It's important that the quality processes are built in as part of the planning process. Another key aspect of project planning is to develop the HR plan. Defining, again in advance as part of the planning process, how we're going to deal with the HR resources required to deliver our plan. The first step is obviously to produce the actual staffing plan. When do you need resources? At what time? What quantity of resources? How long do you need them for? Defining who is required, when they're required, and what their skill sets are going to be. Once you have the staffing plan fulfilled, once you know who you're going to receive on the project, you can then develop a training plan. Do you need to provide training to your team to provide additional support, additional knowledge, additional skills to the people that were identified and staffed to your project based on the plan to ensure that they are equipped to deliver the tasks assigned to them on the project? You need to develop efficient organization structures. You need to ensure that you have a project organization in place that recognizes span of control to make sure that the teams report to leaders who have the knowledge, the skills, and the authority to manage the team, that the teams have appropriate scope of control, that the teams work on a consolidated focused area, that the team leader has the appropriate number of resources reporting to them. Again, a norm being no more than 7 to 8 resources reporting to a leader, that you have an effective organization structure in place for your project, that the teams can work effectively, and to ensure that the team works effectively, you need to develop team norms. People often refer to it, and some projects go to the formality of creating a team contract. Here are the standards and procedures. Here are my expectations of how you will operate as a team member on my project. Here's the process to be followed for email. Here's the process to be followed for telephone communication. Here's the process to be followed for instant messenger communication if you use that on your project. A detailed contract of the team norms of how you're expected to interact with the team, how you're supposed to interact with your team leaders, how you're to interact with the business unit to ensure that you have an effective strategy to deploy and use the HR resources necessary to deliver your project. In my experience, one of the most misunderstood aspects to project planning, project management in general, but project planning and specifically, is the identification and management of risks. Identifying and managing risks is critical to your overall project success. You must have the appropriate contingency and reserves in place to deal with unknown issues, unknown problems that can come in and potentially impact, delay, make your project go over budget. You need to document, you need to review, you need to understand, you need to analyze possible risks that can happen on your project. If this project were perfect, there would be no risks. But very few, if any, projects ever deliver in a perfect environment, so therefore there are risks. There are risks that the team may not have the right training. There are risks that materials may not arrive on time. There are risks that the business environment may change. There are risks that can impact your project success coming at your project from many possible directions. As part of project planning, you need to review and understand and document the realistic, the probable risks, items that you have little to no control over, so that you can develop action plans. If there is a risk for training, if there is a risk that materials will be late, if there is a risk that the business environment will change, you need to have action plans in place. What can we do about training? Can we proactively provide training? Can we have a training program in reserve should the training issues come up? Do we need to allocate additional funding to our project to deal with the additional training? What happens if materials are late? Can we have a standing offer with a second supplier to deliver materials if our primary supplier is late? Can we buy insurance? Can we specify pay a premium to get a guarantee from our suppliers? We need to put action plans in place to eliminate, to remove, to mitigate, to transfer the risk items, and we do that by building in the risk plans. If we need to add additional funds, the word we use in risk management is contingency, to deal with the possibility we may have to put additional training into our project. If we need to buy the insurance policy, pay the premium to our supplier to guarantee delivery of equipment, we build that into our project. It's critical that as a project manager involved in project planning, that you properly identify, build action plans, and build the contingency, build the reserve into the project plan to ensure when the risks, when the uncertainties, when the gotchas come up that are going to impact your project's successful delivery, you have plans, you have funds, you have time in reserve to deal with the risks that are going to come up, because no project ever delivers in a perfect environment. The last component to project planning is plan the procurement. And I hesitate to say it's the last component because it is certainly not the least important. Each of the components of project planning, scope, WBS, time, cost, etc., are all equally important. All must receive the same level of attention as part of the planning process. Planning procurement simply happens to be the last segment that we're discussing, simply happens to be the last segment as defined in the PMBOK guide, but it is absolutely no more or no less important than scope, WBS, budget, quality, etc., etc. What is plan procurement all about? It's identifying what you need to buy. What does the project require that can't be delivered internally within the organization, internally within the project team itself? How much do you need to buy? Do you need to buy additional resources? How many? Do you need to buy materials? How many? Do you need to buy services? How many? And it's identifying when you need to buy it. Do you need to buy them all at the beginning of the project? Do you need to buy a little bit every month? Do you not need to buy anything until month 6 of the project and then buy it all? It's identifying the what, the how much, and the when, the specific components that you need to buy for your project, and then it's developing the specific procurement strategies. Are you going to go to a full public tender and issue an RFP? Are you going to walk down the street to the local store and buy off the shelf? Do you have a preferred supplier and you're going to sole source? Procurement options, procurement strategies, are often as variable as project requirements. Depending on specific project requirements, the what, the how much, the when, depending on specific organizational standards and procedures, organizational policies, your procurement strategy will vary. Sometimes it will be a full public RFP, going through the full tendering process, getting multiple responses, evaluating and selecting the appropriate response. Sometimes it literally is as simple as walking down the street to a local supplier or picking up the telephone and making a phone call to a local supplier and saying, I need to buy a case of paper. I need to buy a pound of nails, whatever the case is going to be. Sometimes it is a sole source. Again, your organization has predefined relationships in place with well-qualified suppliers. It's a little different than simply going down the street to buy off the first company you see. This is a predefined environment in place specific to your organizational procurement requirements. Bottom line, from your project viewpoint, it doesn't really matter specifically the procurement strategy. You just need to determine the specific procurement strategy which satisfies your project requirements of what, how much, and when it needs to be bought for the project. The end result of the planning process is the development of the project management plan. No surprise, the project management plan is going to contain each of the components that we just talked about. A very well-defined, very specific, clear, unambiguous scope statement. It needs to define the elements of the WBS in the schedule. I often find it's most effective to simply combine that and provide screen prints from my scheduling tool. Because a good screen print of a well summarized, proper level of disposition in the Gantt chart from a Microsoft project does an excellent job of delivering both the project WBS and the project schedule. You need to develop the project budget. Again, you don't want to develop a finite line item based project budget, but you need to provide a project budget that is summarized at the appropriate level of detail that will have value to management, value to the people who will read, review, and approve your project management plan. You need to identify the risks. You need to identify the strategies that you're going to take to mitigate, eliminate the risks for your project. You need to define the quality expectations and the quality steps being built into your project, your human resources plan and strategies, and your procurement plan and strategies. I'm going to take and draw a dotted line through my project management plan right here and say all projects, no matter the size, no matter the complexity, no matter the business importance to the organization, need to define a scope statement, need to have the appropriate definition of the WBS in the schedule. Again, I like screen prints from a Microsoft project. Needs to identify and define the project budget, and needs to identify and define the strategies being used and the contingency required to support project risks. All projects, all project management plans need that level of detail. The items below the dotted line, not to suggest that they are less important, because I think all components to planning are important, but you may not need to include specific sections in the project management plan related to quality. A statement on quality in the introduction or the executive summary saying this is the quality expectation for the project may be sufficient for smaller, simpler, less complex projects. Similarly, if it's a small project involving 2 or 3 team members, you've already worked with the human resource department to identify who the team members are going to be, when they're going to join the project. There's no specific training. The project team is small sized, so you don't need specific team contracts. That may be eliminated from the plan altogether. And depending upon the size and the magnitude of the procurement requirements for your project, again, that's a component that is optional based on specific project size and complexity. All projects need to develop a project management plan. It defines what the project is, how you're going to manage it, how you're going to deliver it. It ensures that you have the processes in place to manage the execution and delivery of your project. All projects need these first components. The remaining components are optional, need to be addressed as part of the planning process. Don't skip them because you're running on a small project. You simply may not need to document them formally on the project management plan itself. For the smaller, for the simpler projects that involve fewer number of team members that have less critical impact on the overall organization. This concludes our nugget on project planning. I hope this video has been informative for you, and thank you very much for